have a question. Stephen over there. You can just yell out if you like, Stephen. Got a nice loud voice.
How does New Zealand get it right? What are they up to over there that consistently get this premium marketing brand? Everything, wine, holidays. What's your sort of thinking?
Rugby. I might start with you, John. I think for the wider audience, why does New Zealand always beat Australia in agribusiness? There we go.
Good. Look, I mean, I have a long association with New Zealanders. I went and actually addressed New Zealand Merino when they very first started, which was 25 years ago. I was in another role at the time, and we were trying to change what we packed the wool in. We were going from a jute pack to a poly pack, and this pack was made of 6-micron fibre, which didn't get interfering with the processing. Yet the New Zealand wool industry changed in 3 weeks. It took the Australian wool industry 7 years. And the reality is that they have, as I said before, they're geographically isolated. They can't produce any quantity of everything. So over generations, they're focused on marketing, and they're focused on what the end user, the consumer, actually uses. And they've been, if I look at what they've done in the wool side of things, they've been in front of us for 20 years. And, I'm proud to be part of them. I acknowledge that they're better at it than what we do. And they're the same with their lamb. If I go into what they've done with their lamb, when we were selling lamb at $4 a kilo, they were selling it at $7 a kilo. And they were able to do it just simply because they focus so much of their money and their actual promotion on the clean, green part of, we're geographically isolated. We've got snow-capped mountains. We're really good people. There's only 3 million of us, and we want to be part of the long-term scene.
I reframe it a bit for Kelly. So and I'll come back to New Zealand for Mark. Just how does Canada compete against the US? Because you're in a great position to talk about that, not just ice hockey and things, but maybe in the agribusiness space.
I was going to say that on the wool piece, you're always told when to talk and when to listen, and I was listening because I was not going to address that one. I think in Canada, between Canada and the US, I mean, we I think it's a very different, to be honest, we don't really think of that as a competition. I think actually there's more similarities between the Australian market and the Canadian market, not that we're in competition with each other, but export driven markets. And I think that the key thing, whether you're in Australia or whether you're in Canada or whether you're in New Zealand, is that you protect your access to markets. That's key. And that's, I mean, obviously governments play a role in that, but the sustainability and the focus of how quick, how you adjust, how you create security around your whole supply chain, that's critical. And you have to be good at that. As a Canadian, I think that that has been an area of strength for the Canadian market, and I'm confident will be and is an area of strength for the Australian market. The other thing I think that matters in that whole chain is that not only do you have good protection around the quality and the reliability of your production, access to those markets, but speed in which you can respond. The Canadian market, speaking to that, even to the US market, is the railway allows us to get to port and tidewater, and that whole system is it's not perfect. Ask a grower and they'll tell you what's wrong with it in Western Canada, but it's very reliable. It's set up for service, and it's set up to do exactly what they do, is serve the end customer, which is export.
Yeah, Yep. So I was going to take the wool New Zealand innovation case study to an Australian case study, and that's of the cotton industry in Australia. And so the cotton industry is the most innovative, the most progressive, the most forward-looking industry, and it's quite admirable. And the reasons that were discussed for New Zealand, specific reasons, because for the Australian cotton industry, if they didn't, they wouldn't exist anymore. So in the times that I was a research agronomist in Moree, there'd be 27 organophosphorus sprays across the field. You didn't have to go fishing because the fish would come to the surface. Birds would fall out of the sky, and really the social license to operate would have been lost. And so it's a bit similar to the New Zealand situation where the circumstances forced innovation, and the innovation had to be profitable. And it really goes, Paul, to the themes that we're talking about. This commercially and practically driven innovation for sustainability. And I think that is the case study in Australia, the cotton industry.
There's a question over there, Elke.
Probably less a question than a probably.
Some background too, because you're a wonderful example here of Australia and New Zealand as well.
I do bridge both, yes. But I will say, having had that experience with both, I do support John in the New Zealand argument, because New Zealand is significantly more welcoming for young startups. So in Australia, when I actually tried to start my business, nobody wanted to talk to me unless I had $10 million in the bank. But interestingly, when I went to New Zealand, they were very open and they wanted to get involved because we were doing something different. So there's a significantly bigger appetite for innovative companies and smaller companies. I'm really proud to support them in New Zealand, which is why I think you can really incubate a lot more over there, and they invest behind the New Zealand brand a lot more than what I found here in Australia. I mean, they do a good job, but to John's example, what took them 4 months to do in New Zealand, can take me 10 years here in Australia. So I definitely recognise the difference there. And I think, if Australia really wants to compete on a level where, New Zealand, they punch above their weight, I would really encourage a lot of the businesses, investors to get behind those businesses, the younger startup, really smart young people that are doing some really interesting stuff, and allow them to flourish here in Australia.
Wanted to add to that, John, because that seems like a really good endorsement of what you've been doing.
No, it's look. I can only back it in. I totally agree with you. They listen. Australians tend to tell, and New Zealanders listen. That's the key thing, I think, Paul.
All right, Stephen, in the middle here.
Just at the beginning of this calendar year, beginning of this financial year, I should say, exotic diseases were everywhere in the media. Everyone sort of got a little bit panicked about what was going on there, but we know that it's not only livestock, but it's in bees, the threat now. How has your world changed over the last 12 months as it relates to biosecurity? And do you think we're really on top of it, or have we gotten a little bit relaxed about it more recently?
Might start with Mark and just come down.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think the earlier observation of like the disjoint between metropolitan people, media, and reality of agriculture is pretty strong in this one as well, because I think the biosecurity systems, whether it be plant or animal, are very strong, have been very, very successful clearly, if we talk to grower groups and industry bodies, we all want them to get better, but the integrity is very, very high. And I think from our viewpoint, certainly, we're very, very supportive of the multiple bodies, and also in the cases that you mentioned, I mean, the industry and government formed working groups immediately with very, very strong communication, very, very strong practical and focused initiatives that then we multiplied then out with many other channels into the to the broader producer network. So I mean, it's always an issue. One of our great competitive advantages is around this particular area, but I'm actually comfortable while knowing that there's significantly more improvements. But in terms of the current integrity, I'm comfortable.
Maybe Kelly, you can talk about the North American experience versus Australia a little bit as well.
Yeah, I would maybe a bit echo what Mark had said. I would say that what I've seen is a pretty good system. I think right from the growers to the industry bodies to the players like ourselves, it's no longer a debate of if and how important it is. It's now shifted to, I know one of them is who funds it, and that gets a little bit of a, with the latest budget. That got a little bit of discussion, but I think very importantly, it's very aligned throughout the industry and right top to bottom that it's critical. Um, we now have a funding model in place to mature that and continue to sustain that. And now it's really about, okay, what's the best way to do that? You've got dollars in place. Compliance is one thing, but what are we doing? Are we deploying those dollars to the best resources? Are we continuing to stay ahead of the curve? So a little bit maybe of an echoed answer, maybe a little bit of not a lot of specifics, but I think we're in a good spot. I think the industry takes it seriously. We've got a funding model now. It's about making sure we're deploying that dollar to drive the best outcome.
Just in the North American, do they do anything differently in biosecurity that we could learn from, or are they going to learn from us?
No, I would say they're going to learn from what's happening here in Australia. Two things. One is even in our business here in Australia is very different than what it is in North America. It's just for the group. Nutrien doesn't have a livestock business, doesn't have a lot of the agency business in North America. Even I said I'm from proud rural roots. That's a large broadacre farm, so I'm not going to profess to be a livestock expert. But I would say that when you talk to some of our agents that have had a chance to be over into the North American system, they come away with learnings. But I would say the biosecurity is actually more confidence in what Australia is doing than, hey, why don't we catch up to what's happening in Canada or the US? But I'll pass to John.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was part of the wool industry working group that basically put it all together, and that I know elders and Nutrien were very much part of that as well. And we can now, if there's a biosecurity outbreak in wool, we can actually trace to a farm within 15 minutes of where that wool came from. And what happened with this latest threat of everything was it really jammed everybody into making a decision on how we go about dealing with it. And people put more resource into it, they put more thought into it, there are better systems in place. And, I think we've all come to a point about where we're much more comfortable that we can deal with it if there is an outbreak. Will it cause chaos? You bet it'll cause chaos. But at least we're in a better position to deal with it now than we were probably 2 years ago.
I might just jump in with a question if it's okay, but it's quite a privilege having these three gentlemen up here, and we've got Derek Hines in the back there on Delta Ag as well. We've got basically 80% of Australia's rural service in the room. Australia's got an opportunity in this digital ag space that we've been touching on with Anthony and co. How are we going to progress in digital so that in 2030 we're not going to look back and say we've got all these redundant systems and we haven't taken advantage of it? So I'm very interested again with Kelly being there in North America, which I understand has about 6 different systems on the go. Australia's got this chance potentially of leapfrogging and doing the Chinese that they did with mobile telephony. They didn't do fixed telephony at all. They just jumped to mobile. Has Australia got this opportunity in digital ag to do that? Mark might be a start there if you're comfortable, and then we'll jump around.
Yeah, I think and we've talked about it at previous meetings. And Anthony mentioned the population to support systems in Australia mean that they can't be based out of Australia. And so then if you fragment that even further with trying to develop programs and systems as a competitive advantage for your own company, then it's even more fragmentation. So I think I've preached for many years about a one system, and then we fight each other in the paddock on the service and the quality of our products, et cetera, et cetera. To me, that is the fundamental answer. And the having a single platform with multiple components, which means that the crazy situation we have now with farm management systems where farmers are expected to cut and paste from one to the other, because they won't do it. It'll never happen, and we never get the full benefit of the data that I think that you dream of, that allows to have sound decisions made, and we can just fight each other in the paddock as we always have. So that would be my kind of utopia.
I suppose, but we've been discussing this for 15 years. Do you think we can make some tangible steps in the next short term to making that happen, or do you think in 2030 we're going to look back and say, look, we sort of messed around, like John mentioned about the wool industry. We took 7 years to make the decision that New Zealand made in 7 days.
Well, I mean, if I go back to the cotton case study, it was in crisis.
Yep.
Okay, so nothing, survival was at stake of an industry. Now, at the moment, what have we got? $6 billion in farm deposits, awash with money apart from the El Nino. I mean, sentiment's dropped off in ag, as we know, but it's not really a crisis mode. It's not really a crisis mode, and so I would be very, very surprised if the ingredients are there in terms of the digital infrastructure, in terms of the options. They're there, but I'm not sure if the key driver that has all of us sitting down and working it out one afternoon, I'm not sure if they're there.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
this afternoon we can do it.
Yeah.
Go, Kelly.
I was just on digital, and we've, I would say just within our company, this is a bit of an internal response, and I'll get into to kind of industry. North America was kind of, we were advancing digital in North America probably before we were advancing digital here in Australia, and we've benefited from some of the learnings. There's components that we've been able to take and apply and say this makes sense and it works here. There's learnings that we've been able to say, well, we deployed a lot of dollars to build this, and I'm not sure we had the right focus, had the right platform, the technology. So in our business, I actually feel, and I'm not just saying this because I'm part of the business here and in Australia, is we feel like what we're doing in digital internally in Australia is actually leading within the walls of our company. The other thing we talk about on digital, I think it's important, and we had an opportunity to have some external speakers from various companies, and you always talk about digital is in front of the customer. Well, 60% of digital innovation is behind the walls. 40% of it is probably customer. And I mean, the numbers will vary by industry and company, but and a bit to Mark's point is the 60% is competitive. How we use our data, how we enable our teams to move with speed, make better decisions in their operation and with their customer. You know, we are investing a lot. We think that's important. Everything that's customer facing, you know, I guess utopia is, you know, it's one common system, but when we think about it, or maybe I'd even say when I think about it, what's happening in a paddock or in a livestock operation and how they're driving productivity, to have a view that there's going to be one common platform and that industry is going to unite around solving that. I don't see that happening, even if we spent an hour this afternoon on it. Where we just look, what I would just finish on is where we look at is that intimate decision, whether using a field view or a granular or an ag world, all that. What's important is that the grower has organized data, and then that they're able to digest that into a system that you're going to avoiding double entry. So where we look at it is we become a bit agnostic to what's happening on those production systems in a farm. And we want to make sure that we're able to digest that quick and then be able to add value on where we can and eliminate redundancy in data, because you can't get scale otherwise.
John, then we'll go to Sarah.
Just thinking about innovation in 2030, whatever that is, it'll be very different to what we're talking about today. Everything that we do today will be redundant. You know, 6 months ago, nobody knew what ChatGPT was. And now I have my 11-year-old daughter who 2 nights ago said, "Dad, here's your speech for that thing you're doing the other day." And, you know, that's the reality. The use of AI, we're only at the very beginning of this, and how that gets integrated into all of the different systems that we've got out there, how we can link together. Market's aspirational, I think, you know, for us to be able to have one system and fight in the paddock. I think if I look at all the digital services companies that we've spoken to over the last 4 or 5 months, they're all trying to get an edge in their own area for a commercial benefit, and trying to get them to look at the big picture and say, look, we can really benefit the entire agricultural input industry or the output of it by doing it if we work together. Some will listen, but most won't.
Good. Sarah, last question.
Yeah, hi. Sarah Gorman from DAS. Just deep diving a little bit more on digital, and I think, John, picking up on what you said about commercial benefit, I think, how would you stack rank? You've all talked specifically around digital. If you're going to use it to grow, are you going to use it to strengthen your risk management, help your people work smarter and faster or just be more efficient. How are you thinking about stack ranking the benefits? So is it growth? Is it risk? Is it internal processes? So, you know, I'm kind of picking up more on what you said as well, Kelly, that it's not about aligning around one platform, for instance. It's actually completely flipping this to the inverse about how can digital benefit our businesses? And I'm just really keen to hear a little bit more about how you're thinking about that.
Kelly, you might lead off there.
Yeah. Well, we do look at it as any time you're deploying capital, we look at it as a business case. And we do look at it at ROI, and it's part of it is what are the efficiencies we can achieve inside? What are the growth enablers that it will have? And risk is a piece of it, but I would say that's, we look at really growth and efficiencies. Now, the thing I would say is that I kind of joke with my team sometimes is know the assumptions you're making, but be confident that everyone is going to be wrong. And when it comes to digital, is when we look at some of the bets we're making, hey, we can grow this much or we can drive this much, you know, time of someone's day out. We look at all those just so that we can go back and measure where we were right, where, and I think this is an overused word in digital, but that agile, you know, agile is how you build something, but I think how we approach it is we do look at each individual business case. We do look at it as a deployment of capital and what is the return. We do have definitive assumptions we make and we measure against those, but we're really trying to understand which ones did we get really right, which ones did we get really wrong, and how is that going to shape our next investment decision.
So John, and then we might finish up with Mark.
Look,
Great
you
answer,
know,
Kelly,
yeah,
for start.
I think that, you know, that everybody, like, I mean, we're very much like Kelly. If we look at it and we go, you know, I'm commercial. At the end of the day, I sit there and say, what's in it for us? And is this a good decision? I think it's about gaining control of the data to be able to add value to your clientele or to be able to add value to your business. And if you can do that, we employ specialists that go right into it, that deep dive into our data. And again, it's about being able to go to our client and saying, do you realise that if we go down this path, we can make more money for you? And that's why you should deal with us. It's probably not anything actually harder than that at this stage. Where do I think it'll lead to? I think this is that the evolution of this space is going to be the greatest thing since the internet. You know, this is what's going to happen. And, you know, everyone's trying to second guess what's coming next with it. And you know what? I look forward to it. You know, the change is good. Yep, it'll be difficult for some people, and it'll take us down to different things. You know, I think the 60 Minutes thing on Sunday with AI said they're going to make 80 million people redundant by the year 2025, but they'll create 92 million more jobs. And that's what it'll be. It'll be, you know, the youth of tomorrow will have a completely different perspective in what they can add to a client out in the field. It's growing a crop, selling livestock, doing everything.
Thank you, John. Mark, finish her up.
Yeah, very consistent thinking. I think for the sake of morning tea, just a summary position would be platform. Well, firstly, digital, such a broad definition, but let's say platform as the first part, then go to customer, and then growth, which I think is pretty consistent, but in one or two less words for morning tea.
Okay. And thank you very much, Mark, Kelly, and John for a fantastic start, and Adrian for his introduction, because this is what this conference is about for 21 years. We're just trying to bring the right people into the room and talk about risk carefully and sensibly, because there is risk, but if we've got the right people in the room, the investors, the companies, the customers, the regulators, all in the room, we can make little steps in the right direction. And that's what we've been doing for 21 years. We'll have a short break and come back and continue. Talk soon.
Thank you.